Hey everyone, welcome back. My name is Mac, and today we're talking about Elemental Shaman cooldown usage. Specifically, I want to break down Stormkeeper and Ascendance and how to use them together properly. But let's start with the basics. Stormkeeper is a 45-second cooldown, and Ascendance is a straight 2-minute cooldown, generally in all of our builds. This means in any cooldown cycle, you have a choice. Do you play around getting 2 Stormkeeper casts between Ascendance windows, or do you try to squeeze 3 in? And the answer to that question actually entirely depends on whether you're in Raid or Mythic Plus, and even really depending upon the specific fight you might be in. Now, you might remember I made a video about cooldown usage not too long ago, where I said the answer was to just basically send Stormkeeper on cooldown. After more personal testing, especially with the tier set, I realized that was probably wrong and it's more nuanced than I made it sound in that video. But today I want to address that and clear the air, and specifically talk about why Stormkeeper and Ascendance should be paired, and more importantly, how to actually think about the decision of holding one of them for the other. In my last video, one of the things I didn't give enough credit to was the haste buff we get from our tier set with Stormkeeper casts. I knew it was good, I just wasn't properly accounting for how much it actually changes the value of your Ascendance window specifically. After more testing, it became pretty clear that the haste buff combined with everything else during Ascendance makes this window significantly more impactful than I was treating it. Inside Ascendance, you're trying to get as many casts as possible through a 15-second window, and when coupled with Stormkeeper, it is just so much more powerful. You've got instant cast lightning bolts or chain lightnings through Stormkeeper, so you're not bleeding cast time in your filler, and the tier set haste buff means that your remaining globals inside that window are just ticking much faster. Together, those two things make a meaningful increase in how many total casts you're getting through your Ascendance, and because Ascendance also amplifies your overload damage significantly, more casts in that window means more overloads means a lot more damage. This is what I wasn't properly weighing in the last video. In that video, I framed the main question as how many Stormkeeper casts do you get over a fight? And that's not necessarily wrong, but the more important question that I didn't ask is how much does each Stormkeeper cast contribute, and where does it contribute the most? And the answer to those questions is clearly in your Ascendance window by a meaningful margin. So in a 2-minute Ascendance cycle, you theoretically have room for either 2 or 3 Stormkeeper casts, depending upon how you want to play it. And that distinction is where this whole conversation lives. Those are the two scenarios that play out pretty differently, so let's walk through each of them to give you a good understanding of both. The cleaner of the two options is planning for 2 Stormkeeper charges between each Ascendance cast. In a perfect world, the math works out to roughly 30 seconds hold on your second Stormkeeper to make it line up with Ascendance. But in practice, you're never playing in a perfect world. You have movement, mechanics, whatever, and that hold is probably ending up closer to around 20 seconds. That's not a nothing loss, but it is manageable. You're still getting 2 Stormkeeper casts between that Ascendance window, and that one that you do get inside your Ascendance window is where it's most valuable. This is the more realistic and reliable of the two options, and it's the one that I would recommend planning around as your default choice. Theoretically though, you could fit 3 Stormkeeper charges in between a 2-minute Ascendance window, but you'd have to hold Ascendance pass when it comes off of cooldown, so let's talk about when that might be the right choice. On paper, holding Ascendance for 15 seconds is all it takes to fit 3 clean Stormkeepers into that window. The problem is assuming completely perfect situations in Stormkeeper usage with 0 downtime between all 3 casts, which just is not realistic. If you introduce even 5 seconds of downtime across those 3 Stormkeeper casts, which is genuinely conservative, you're now holding Ascendance for closer to 30 seconds instead of 15. And 30 seconds is roughly the same amount that you'd be holding Stormkeeper in the 2-charge setup anyways. So you end up holding for that same amount of time, but now you're sitting on your Ascendance cooldown instead of your Stormkeeper cooldown. And that is a big difference because it is a lot less detrimental to hold Stormkeeper than it is to hold Ascendance. So while the 3 Stormkeeper scenario looks appealing in theory, in practice the math usually doesn't justify it outside of specific circumstances. But let's talk about those circumstances. In Mythic Plus, the goal is the same as everywhere else. Pair Stormkeeper with Ascendance every time. The 2-charge setup is still the baseline, but Mythic Plus is where the 3-charge setup becomes most justifiable, and the reason is just due to the format. In Raid, you're locked into a scripted fight with a fixed timeline. In Mythic Plus, the pull-to-pull variance gives you a lot of flexibility that Raid just doesn't have. Your tank might grab a bigger pull than expected or a smaller one. The mobs might die at different rates, routes might shift depending upon how the road run is going, and you've got RP, skips, accidental pulls, and all that adding variance. And that variance means holding Ascendance for an extra 15 to 30 seconds to fit a 3rd Stormkeeper cast in costs you a lot less than it technically looks on paper. In Mythic Plus, the downtime between pulls is your built-in syncing time. Your cooldowns are ticking down while you're not always in combat, which means you're often not actually paying the real cost of that hold. But the key here is being able to read that situation. You want to be able to pair the two cooldowns, but around 30 seconds remaining on your Ascendance window cooldown, you have a choice that is determined by the current situation you're in. I'm not saying always one or always the other. Everything about Mythic Plus is fluid, so you need to be able to determine the best course of action based on what's occurring in the dungeon to make sure that you have everything to send together. So in Mythic Plus, think of the 2-charge setup as your go-to and the 3-charge setup as the variable option you can pull out when the run naturally gives you the room to do it. Raid, on the other hand, is a bit more strict, mainly because of how scripted everything is. Let's use Voracious as an example. Voracious has a strict enrage timer of roughly 6 minutes, but realistically, most kills are happening around 5 minutes 30. In that long of a boss fight, you're getting 3 Ascendance windows, on pull, 2 minutes in, and 4 minutes in. Now, if you're running the 3-charge setup, this costs you an extra theoretical 15 to 30 seconds on your Ascendance. And does that actually affect how many Ascendance casts you get in this fight? In this case, no. Even if you hold Ascendance for a bit and try to fit that 3rd Stormkeeper in, you're still getting all 3 windows before the fight ends. So in a fight like Voracious, the 3-charge setup might be a legitimate option since you're not losing an Ascendance cast. If you can execute it cleanly enough, you're just squeezing more Stormkeeper value out of those windows than you would have if you did the 2-charge setup. But now let's flip it a little bit and imagine the same fight, but the kill time is 6 minutes 30 seconds instead of 5 minutes 30 seconds. At 6 minutes 30, you would be getting a 4th Ascendance window if you play it cleanly. But if you're holding Ascendance for 15 to 30 seconds on multiple cycles to run that 3-charge setup, you've now pushed that 4th Ascendance back past that 6 minute 30 timer. That means an entire Ascendance cast is gone, which is a massive loss and completely undoes any benefit you would get from the extra Stormkeeper casts in between Ascendance. In that version of the fight, the 2-charge setup is technically correct. So the way to think about raid is, look at the expected fight length, figure out how many Ascendance windows you're getting, and then ask yourself whether holding Ascendance for an extra 15 to 30 seconds is going to cost you one of those windows on the tail end. If the answer is no, the 3-charge setup might be on the table. If the answer is yes, or even maybe, I would probably stick to the 2-charge setup. But when in doubt, default to 2-charge. Missing an Ascendance window is always a bigger loss than giving up a single cast of Stormkeeper. But let's bring it all back for a second. Stormkeeper and Ascendance need to be used together, and Stormkeeper needs to be precast before you press Ascendance. In most situations, the 2-charge setup is your default, but the key detail here is being able to read the room. So if you get used to reading the room a bit more, your damage will significantly improve, and your burst will be absolutely bananas if you do it properly. But that's all I have for today. If this helped you out, make sure to like the video. It really does help the channel out a bunch, and if you want more Elemental or general WoW content, make sure to subscribe as well. Also, I've been streaming over on Twitch every Tuesdays and Thursday at 8 PM Eastern, so if you want to just hang out, ask questions, or just watch Raid or Keys, feel free to stop by and say hi. And if you want to support the channel a little bit more directly, I've got a Patreon link below where I offer coaching and additional content, along with a Discord where you can talk about the spec, ask questions, or just hang out with the community. But yeah, that's all I got for this one, so thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I will see you in the next one.